All right, welcome back to pre-4-4. This is the second part of pre-4-4, which we are going to talk about how to solve quadratic equations using square roots. We've already talked about in sections 4.2 solving quadratic equations using graphing, and in section 4.3 solving quadratic equations using factoring. So let's look at solving quadratic equations by square roots. Again, this is a concept that you should have learned in Algebra 1 but may not have been taught it, so we're going to cover it because we're going to use it the rest of the chapter actually. So part of the concept of square roots is knowing the definition of square roots. The definition of square roots says if x squared is equal to n, then x is equal to plus or minus the square root of n. If you think of that with a number, hopefully it makes better sense. If x squared is equal to 4, then x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 4, or x is equal to plus or minus 2. Now, you may be wondering why there's a plus and a minus. Well, here's the concept, and this is something you have to remember to do. That when you are solving an equation with a square in it, so x squared equals 4, if I were to actually solve this using algebra, what I would do is I would take the square root of both sides of the equation. Now we talked a little bit about the square root of x squared, or x times x, and that is just x. However, if you take the square root of both sides of an equation, then the one side has to have a plus and a minus in it. The reason is because if you were to actually check this, and you were to take the original problem and plug in value of x. So if I take this, which there's two answers, 2 and negative 2. If I plug in 2, it works because 2 squared is 4. 4 equals 4. If I put in negative 2, that also works. So there are actually two solutions to this equation. When I take the square root of both sides, I have to do plus and minus on the other side. Therefore, I have a plus and a minus 2. Okay, so the steps to solving a quadratic equation. Now I'm going to move the camera so I can focus in on this side of the board. The steps to solving a quadratic equation using square roots, we want to remind you what standard form is. ax squared plus bx equals c is standard form. However, when you are using square roots to solve an equation, the b is equal to 0. So actually, your standard form in this case is going to be just ax squared plus c equals 0. In other words, you do not have an x term. You do not have a middle term such as x squared minus 4 equals 0. Therefore, you do not have a bx in the middle, just an ax squared plus c. Now, if I were to solve this, the steps of solving a quadratic equation using square roots, get x squared by itself. So, in this case, again, just like I did previously, x squared is equal to 4. The second step, square root both sides. Don't forget the plus and the minus. So there's where I was taking the square root of both sides, x equals plus or minus the square root of 4, and then of course simplify your answer, so x is plus or minus 2. Again, that's two solutions, plus 2 and negative 2. Okay, so pretty simple. Here's a couple examples. X squared minus 9 equals 0. I've got x squared, if I add 9 to both sides, x squared is equal to 9. I take the square root of both sides, don't forget the plus and minus, x is equal to plus or minus 3. Again, those are two solutions. Many students will forget the plus and minus. When they forget the plus and minus, they've only given me half the solutions. Okay, so that's something you want to keep in mind. Add 56, add 56. X squared equals 56. Again, we are going to take the square root of both sides, plus and minus, x equals plus or minus the square root of 56. And of course, simplify that. 4 goes into 56. 4 is our largest perfect square. 4 and 14. So 2 square root of 14 plus or minus is my two answers. So there's my two solutions to that equation. 4x squared minus 25. You notice I have a number in front of x squared this time other than 1. When that happens, this is a perfect square, which is nice, and I'm going to show you how to solve it with a perfect square. We'll talk about how to solve it without a perfect square later. But at this point, again, we get the square by itself. So we add 25 to both sides. We divide by 4. X squared equals 25 fourths. Take the square root of both sides, so x is plus or minus the square root of 25 fourths, which if you take the square root of 25 fourths, you should get 5 halves. Try to keep things as simplified fractions if you can. We are going to be doing that a lot. We are not going to go right to a decimal like we've talked about in the past. Okay, at this point, we are going to do the try these problems. So I've got 2 of them here. Please try these, pause your video, and I will see you back here in a minute. Okay, so hopefully you've tried these. Here's x squared minus 12 equals 0. I'm going to add 12. X squared is equal to 12. Take the square root. X is equal to plus or minus the square root of 12. If I simplify that, I should get plus or minus 2 square root of 3. The square root of 4 times the square root of 3, and the square root of 4 is 2. Okay, the second one, add 64, add 64. 9x squared equals 64. Divide by 9. So now I know that x is equal to the square root, plus or minus, of course, 64 ninths, which x is equal to plus or minus 8 thirds. Again, try to leave things in simplified fraction form, just like we've talked about in the past. Hopefully that made sense. Let me know if you need any help with that or have any questions. Of course, you can always send me a message on Google Classroom or email any questions you may have.